The Economist.
For Kamala Harris's presidential campaign, election night started badly and got worse.
That math sends a shockwave through the Harris campaign.
There is not a single state that they are expressing confidence right now that they are going to win.
That's a major race call in the state of Georgia. We can now report, according to the Associated Press, that has gone for former President Trump. And here is a look at where the national...
A few hours into the count, the mood at her home base began to falter.
We will continue overnight to fight to make sure that every vote is counted, that every voice has spoken. So you won't hear from the vice president tonight.
Soon after, Fox News kicked off the calls.
The Fox News decision desk can now officially project that Donald Trump will become the 47th president of the United States.
For weeks, the world wondered when the result would be clear. Days, weeks, months even. In the end, America is waking up to a far more decisive-looking map. Several swing states have come up red, and Mr. Trump has claimed victory.
Well, I want to thank you all very much. This is great. These are our friends. We have thousands of friends on this. It is now clear that we've achieved the most incredible political thing. Look what happened. Is this crazy? But it's a political victory that our country has never seen before, nothing like this. I want to thank the American people for the extraordinary honor of being elected your 47th president and your 45th president.
Now, to talk through how things are falling out, I'm joined by John Prideaux, Charlotte Howard, and Idris Khaloun, the hosts of our U.S. politics podcast, Checks and Balance. Charlotte, Idris, John, hello. Great to have all three of you on the show.
Hi, Jason.
Hi.
Hi, Jason. Nice to be with you again.
Now, John, Charlotte, very early morning in New York for you. Very early morning for you, Idris, in D.C. I'm in London. Catch me up on things. Where to start? John, what do I need to know?
Well, Jason, there's still a couple of states that haven't been called, but Donald Trump is going to be the next president of the United States. So he'll be both the 45th and the 47th president, the first president to win non-consecutive terms since Grover Cleveland at the end of the 19th century. It's a big victory. He's won by a big margin in the Electoral College, and it means the Trump era in American politics will extend from 2016, when he first won, through till January 2029, when he will leave office.
Yeah, there was an inkling early in the night that it might not be a good outcome for Kamala Harris when she was trailing how Joe Biden performed in Virginia. And then the news got worse. She lost in Georgia. She lost in North Carolina, 2 of the 7 important swing states that we knew would decide the outcome of this election. And then when she started really dramatically trailing Joe Biden's performance in the blue wall of states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, it looked like it would indeed turn out to be a great night for Donald Trump.
Yeah, it looks pretty clear that Kamala Harris underperformed basically everywhere. New Jersey is very close. She probably has only won New York by the lowest margin of any Democrat in decades. It's very likely that Donald Trump will have won the popular vote when all is said and done as well. So that's a pretty strong repudiation of her. And I think it's one that Democrats have not really grappled with. I mean, the mood at the Kamala Harris victory party, where I attended along with my colleague Tamara Gilks-Bohr, was pretty jubilant at first, and it just petered out like a balloon losing its air. And my colleague Adam O'Neill was at the Donald Trump victory party, which got increasingly happy as the night progressed.
This is Tamara Gilks-Bohr, U.S. policy correspondent at The Economist. I'm at Vice President Kamala Harris' election night party at Howard University in Washington, D.C. It is now 12:19 p.m. and the mood has greatly changed from being one of a party atmosphere where people were excited and dancing.
She will be the first African-American woman to be president of the United States of America. So I'm very, very happy that she's in this race, and I'm sure she's going to win.
To a much more somber atmosphere where there's a little bit of dancing, a little bit of flag waving, but for the most part, people are sitting quietly looking at the results.
I'm trying to keep hope. I really want her to win Pennsylvania, and I think she can, even though the numbers aren't in her favor right now.
I'm hoping for the best with it, and at the end of the day, I'm just excited to be here and support.
As I speak, people are starting to stream out of the event. Overall, this is a disappointing night.
I'm Adam O'Neill, The Economist's Washington correspondent. I'm here at Donald Trump's election night watch party in West Palm Beach, Florida. The candidate has not arrived yet, but the convention center hall where the party is taking place is filling up. Everyone is in a really festive, partying mood, and frankly, they're just becoming ecstatic now. Yeah, you think it's going to be a blowout?
Yes.
We're going to see very soon, right?
Let us speak for ourselves. I don't know.
If you look at the momentum, everywhere you go, there are Trump signs. Everybody's excited about Trump. You have all these massive endorsements. They said 2 months ago, if Joe Rogan endorses Trump, the campaign is over.
Now they're just awaiting the candidate and for more results to come in, but couldn't imagine a more upbeat crowd.
So clearly two very different moods here, very different results in the end. Itself surprising. I mean, what do you guys make of that? How do we get here?
One of the things that I was most struck by is how Trump, who has always upended conventional wisdom in politics, continued to do that this time. So, for instance, he outsourced his ground game. That didn't seem to hurt him at all. Instead of tacking to the center, he played to his base again and again. You saw him do this at the Republican convention. You saw him do it at Madison Square Garden. And that seemed to pay off for him. Not only did his base turn out in higher numbers than they had, but the Democratic base turned out for him. If you look at certain counties, Wayne County, which is home to Detroit, he saw a huge uptick compared with where he had been 4 years ago. In New York City, where I'm based, he was up 10 points in the Bronx and 10 points in Queens. He won 38% of the vote in Queens. That's just an astonishing number. And so you think about just how extraordinary that is, given the way that he ran his campaign. And I think Idris is absolutely right that there's a ton of soul-searching for Democrats to do because Donald Trump has really remade the Republican Party in so many ways, not least of which is that he has become definitively the party of the working class, and Democrats really have to figure out how to recover from that.
I think the blame game will start pretty immediately, and some amount of it will go onto Joe Biden for holding on to his presidential ambitions when it was clear that he could no longer do the job well. What's so striking about these results is that the American people clearly thought that one person was not qualified for the job of president, and it wasn't Donald Trump, it was Joe Biden because he was too old. The decision that Democrats then took to coronate Kamala Harris as their nominee, who had conducted a disastrous primary campaign in 2020, and to then lead the party, that will also be questioned, even though she did better than a lot of people thought that she would. But there's going to be a lot of questioning about how it is that Democrats lost, like Charlotte said, the working class, despite Joe Biden throwing as much as possible at unions and trying to win them back. There's just a lot of trouble that the Democratic Party finds himself in.
Charlotte's already talked about Donald Trump's working class base of support. What's really striking within that is what a cross-racial coalition it now is. I mean, if you look at counties that have a lot of Hispanic voters, Donald Trump has done so much better there than he did in 2020. And the same is true of a lot of counties. And we talked about Wayne County in Michigan, Charlotte. That's a county with lots of African-American voters. Donald Trump has done so much better there than he did in 2020. And so one of the things that strikes me is, again and again, Democrats think, oh, Donald Trump has said this thing that's kind of offensive and he's going to put off this group of voters, and it doesn't happen.
So let's move on from the presidential part of this and find our way through the ballot. What about the congressional part of this? A third of the Senate was up for election, the entire House. Let's talk through how that is looking so far. Idris?
Well, we know for sure that Republicans have won the Senate. The question is just by how much. So Sherrod Brown, who was running for a tough re-election in Ohio, lost. That flipped the chamber to them. As we're talking now, there are a few Senate races that are still being counted. Generally, Democratic Senate candidates did better than Kamala Harris in a lot of these states, but it's still looking incredibly tight. John Tester is still probably likely to lose in Montana. Tammy Baldwin looks like she is in a tough position in Wisconsin. If both of those went to the Republicans, they would get 53 seats, which would be a pretty good majority. And there's a possibility Dave McCormick is up in Pennsylvania. That would give them 54, which would be a pretty large majority. That would have a lot of ramifications for who Trump is actually able to confirm to his executive positions. So for Democrats, the Senate races were not much better than the presidential.
And what about the House, where every seat was up for grabs, Charlotte?
So it's been more than a century since the House flipped in the opposite direction of the White House. So it was very unlikely that Trump would win the presidential election and Republicans would lose the House. At this point, though, we can't call the House. It's going to take a while for all those many, many seats to come in. It is interesting to look at a state like New York, which is home to many swing districts and some of the most hotly contested races this time round. So far, there is not such bad news for Democrats out of this state. There are 2 Democrats who managed to defend their seats, which were closely fought, and then they flipped 2 seats. So it's not clear that there'll be a landslide for Republicans in the House the way there has been for Trump in the race for the White House.
So assuming then that Republicans do take the House, John, tell me this, what does it mean for that kind of triple play? Republicans in the White House, straight through Congress, what'll happen with that?
Yeah, and I think that is a safe assumption. If Donald Trump wins the popular vote, I would be shocked if Republicans didn't win a majority in the House of Representatives. So that means a Republican trifecta. It means unified government in Washington. That's when big legislation can get passed. And next year, the Trump tax cuts from 2018, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act expires. That's one bit of legislation we know there'll be a lot of congressional wrangling on. Donald Trump has some very clear domestic policy priorities. He says he wants a 20% universal tariff on all American imports. He wants higher tariffs on Chinese imports. All those things, his immigration policy, those will be decided not through compromise between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. They will be decided by internal Republican Party coalition politics. That will be quite messy. There remains a wide range of opinion on a lot of matters within the Republican Party that's masked really by the fealty towards Donald Trump that everybody in the Republican Party expresses these days. But nevertheless, it is Trump's party now. He set the terms. This is his victory. And so I think we should expect to see some, fully Trumpian legislation in the next 2 years.
I think that that's so important and part of the broader story of the second Trump term compared with the first Trump term, right? Which is that you have Trump unleashed. He's not constrained in the way that he would be by his advisors because he's cleaned house, and half of the people in his cabinet didn't endorse him a second time, which is really striking. So he's not constrained by his advisors in the way that he was. The Supreme Court has given broad immunity to the president from criminal prosecution. And for the legislative priorities he has, he'll be much less constrained by Congress. So those 3 things make the possibilities for a Trump second term very different than they were the first time around.
And just a footnote to that, he's likely, I think, to get to appoint 2 more Supreme Court justices. If Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito retire, that would take his total to 5 of the 9. So that's another way in which he will leave a very lasting mark on the country.
Right. Well, thanks for that, everybody. There's still plenty more to talk about. We'll be back in a minute. We've spoken a lot on the show about campaign messaging and how it would land. Republicans running largely on the economy. Democrats in large part on abortion. Let's put aside the economy for the moment and look at those abortion ballot initiatives. 10 states had one on the ballot. Our West Coast correspondent Aaron Braun was at a polling location on the campus of Arizona State University in Tempe. Arizona's been in the crosshairs of basically all of the different campaign messages. It's a swing state, it's a border state, and it had an abortion referendum on the ballot.
I turned 19 on September 20th. I'm supporting Kamala Harris because I'm pro-choice. That's a huge issue for me. I care about climate change. That's a huge issue for me. And although I don't 100% agree with a lot of Kamala's policies, I don't agree with her on her immigration policies. I think that she has a huge chance.
Have you all voted yet?
Yes, I voted early.
You voted early.
Yeah,
Do you
we
mind
voted
if I
early.
ask who you're supporting?
Trump.
Trump, yeah.
Yeah. Why is that? What attracts you to him?
Policies, economy, illegals, abortion rights. It's just like crazy to me because like abortion is through the states and it's going to be hard for Kalama to overturn that. And he's not against abortion like that. Like if someone gets raped and the border was open due to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
So, John, what's been the result of those abortion votes so far that we know?
Well, just to back up a bit, Jason, and give some context, after Donald Trump appointed his justices to the Supreme Court, they overturned Roe v. Wade. That allowed states to put in place their own abortion laws. In many states with Republican governors and Republican state houses, laws were signed that banned abortion outright. And so in the past couple of years, there have been various abortion referenda, ballot initiatives to try and essentially reinstate something like the protections that were under Roe v. Wade. Those have had a good record of success up until now. So the most important state that had an abortion referendum in this cycle was Florida. The rules here were that in order to amend Florida's constitution to enshrine abortion rights in there, the referendum would have to pass a 60% threshold. And it got close, strikingly close in a way, given that Donald Trump won Florida by a mile. But 57% of Florida voters voted for that. So it's just fallen short. And results elsewhere have been pretty mixed. In Missouri, voters threw out a total abortion ban. We're still waiting for results from Nebraska and South Dakota, but it's not looking good there for the pro-choice campaign. And just to underline the importance of Florida here, it's a very important state in its own right. It's a population of 22 million people, but it's also surrounded by states that have very restrictive abortion laws. And so it was an important state for women to travel to in order to get an abortion, and they will not be able to do that.
And Charlotte, as for the economy messaging, how do you think that has landed, has performed for Republicans?
The short answer is extremely well. Trump had a very simple and very effective pitch, which was that Biden and Democrats oversaw inflation in the short term. And in the long term, Republicans and Democrats, elitists, basically sold ordinary Americans a fantasy that immigration and globalization wouldn't hurt them. And he argues that they did. And that really simple message seemed to land, not just again among the Republican base, but among a broader set of voters who feel like the government and elites have not heard them, and Trump does. Whether or not Trump's policies would actually help is an entirely separate question. So raising tariffs by 20% across the board, or even by 200% or higher on cars from Mexico, as an example, would not do anything to curb inflation. It would do the opposite, right? But the simple message and the idea that Trump understood this problem really landed. And then in contrast, you had Kamala Harris with a much more detailed and one could argue thorough set of economic policies in an 80-page plan. Harris had all kinds of proposals, capping the price of insulin, supporting construction of new housing, again and again, earned income tax credit, expanding that, a long list of ideas that didn't really resonate, and Trump's simpler message did.
The Economist has been pointing out for a while that America's economy is extraordinarily successful at the moment. The historic pattern has been that incumbent presidents have been re-elected in strong economies. Large numbers of Republicans believe that the economy is in recession, though it's not. The economy probably won't change a lot between now and January when Donald Trump is inaugurated. But I expect that come January, he will be able to just point to the existing economic data and say, you see, I brought back the greatest economy in American history. I've done it already, and declare victory.
So while you're doing some crystal ball gazing there, John, I want to come back to a prediction that Idris made on yesterday's show that Donald Trump would claim victory on election night, which has turned out to be true. As we're recording this, he is addressing his supporters and taking quite a triumphalist tone.
Yeah, he is claiming victory, but that's because he did win fair and square by a large margin. But Trump is not going to change. So he's also claimed that he's won all of the contested Senate races that are currently being counted and that are a lot closer than the presidential election was. He's claimed that the Republicans have won the House, which of course we don't know for sure. So it is a preview of the Trumpian years that we have ahead of us.
Now, one of the things we spoke quite a lot about before the election was how well it would be accepted, the result. This is, I suppose, a clear result, not going to be tied up in the courts for weeks. How do you feel now about all of those fears that things were going to get really messy on that score? Charlotte?
Well, I think that it was always plain from the way that Trump spoke about the outcome that there was a higher risk of denialism from the Republican side. I think that this outcome will spark very high emotions and a strong reaction from some members of the American public. And I think that that may have different manifestations in different places. It's almost 3 a.m. in New York. I don't know what New York will be like at 8 a.m, 9 a.m, tomorrow afternoon. I live near Union Square in Manhattan, which is a common place for there to be demonstrations. I expect that there will be demonstrations there tomorrow evening. So we'll see. But I think the likelihood of an event like we saw on January 6th of 2021 is extremely unlikely, which is good. But I think that, I think it's too early to say all will be calm.
Yes, Charlotte's clearly right about this. The bigger risk was if Harris had won and won narrowly. The way I'm thinking about this is the good thing is that America will avoid the short-term chaos between now and Donald Trump's inauguration in about 2 months' time. We were worried about how that period would play out if the result was close or in the case of a narrow Harris victory. So that's a good thing. But America's traded, in my view, that for a longer-term chaos of returning, or at least 4 years of chaos of returning Donald Trump to the White House. I think that will be chaotic in the White House, chaotic for America, chaotic for the world.
I agree with that. And to add one more thought, if he had lost, Donald Trump would have tested the democratic system. Now that he's won, he's going to test the democratic system in all kinds of other ways. We know this because of the plans that he's laid out when he talks about going after his political enemies with the use of the Justice Department as one notable but not sole manifestation of that. So I think that it's up to those who are close to him and to the other people who lead America's institutions to withstand those tests. But there's lots more to say on this. We're coming down to Washington later this week to record our usual podcast and a live subscriber event to take questions. So, Idris, looking forward to seeing you then.
Yes, I'm looking forward to seeing you then as well.
Well, for my part, it has been a real delight to have this checks and balance takeover on the intelligence. I want to thank you guys for your time and I guess bid you good night. Get some rest. John, Charlotte, Idris, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us, Jason.
Thank you.